You're going to want to watch this video if you're trying to pass NASM 2025, a complete breakdown, everything you need to know in this 30-minute video. We have live calls. We talk about chapter 12 in my book. That's going to save you so much time and energy. Take that anxiety off the table because 800 pages is too much. Like this video, subscribe, let us know we can help you become a successful personal trainer. Keep showing up. Hi to everybody. Let's get you to pass your NASM ASAP. We will review a good 30 so slides that will be recorded, put on the platform. For those that are listening on demand, you can shoot an email over and we can send you some of the free resources that we have. We've been doing this for a while. I used to teach at a school called NPTI, helped over 5,000 people pass NASM. The goal is speed. And the reason it's speed is because we were talking prior, Ashley, as part of the Show Up team, and we were going over some of the biggest fears that trainers have. And one of those fears is sales, it's getting clients, the competence of the delivery of getting clients results. And those fears are always going to be there until you get out there and start getting hands-on learning. And so I want to start with, and if you want to participate, you can. If you don't feel any pressure, because some people, this may be your first time, or you just got your NASM and you want to kind of ease into it. So you can follow along, but I want to see how you would do with this, because this is one of the first things when I tutor someone is I start with how well do you do on answering these without multiple choice. And I think that's really important because when you take the exam, you're naturally going to have a lot of anxiety. You're going to read it. You're going to look at the 4 answers, read it again, read the 4 answers, eliminate a couple, read it again. And then you start getting anxious and overwhelmed. And that's our lovely cortisol hormone that's going to mess with our memory. That is a catabolic hormone. And it's great to experience during the exam, but we want to teach you techniques that are going to make the process easier. We've helped people pass it in less than 7 days, and we've had people pass it in 20 minutes. So when you understand the testing protocol that's going to set you up for success, this exam is super, super easy. Now, again, as I said earlier, if you are listening to this online, or maybe you failed it, you're not a failure. That's important to understand, is no one learns well through a textbook. We are personal trainers. We're kinesthetic beings. We do well in the trenches, helping clients move. And a textbook doesn't help you with that. So let's start off by recognizing, see how you would do with this. Do you know the basic names for these muscles? The reason they are color-coded is for overactive or underactive. This is where I like to begin. If you look at these 10 muscles, how confident are we recognizing the 10? We should know at least 8. If you don't know 8, then you need to get into the overactive and underactive muscles. Starting on the left side, this is called the anatomical position. Your hands would be supinated. This is the front side, anterior. On the right side, it's the posterior side. So starting with the most distal means furthest away. Does anyone know the name of this muscle right here, number 1? And no pressure to answer, but this would be the anterior. That bone right there is the tibia, anterior tibialis. That is underactive. And what do we do to underactive muscles? We need to know that we are going to strengthen with the 4-2-1-1 tempo. Moving superiorly, which is above, number 2, this is pointing to one of the 4 quad muscles. And one of the things that NASM makes you memorize is the overactive, underactive, but not necessarily the functional anatomy. They're not going to ask you what does the VMO do. They're just going to say the client is performing an overhead squat. They have knee valgus. Which of the following muscles would be underactive? And the answer you'd be looking for is the vastus medialis, which is the medial quad muscle. And if we were to move across the body to number 2 on red, that would be the adductor complex, and that would always be overactive. Anteriorly moving up to the left, red 5, we have International Chest Day being on Monday. That is the pectoralis major. And if you were to remove the pec major, which would be called deep, you have the pec minor. And the most superior muscle on the left side here would be the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And that's what that's pointing at, number 5. That's over and underactive. You have on the posterior side, number 4, most inferior, which is below. That's the gastrocnemius, and beneath the gastrocnemius, you have your soleus. Moving up to number 3, That is your gluteus maximus, and just incorporate all of the glutes as underactive. Maximus, medius, and minimus. Number 1 is the big posterior dorsal muscle. Dorsal means backside. Think of a dorsal fin like a dolphin. You have the latissimus dorsi. And then right square in the middle, we have the underactive middle and lower trapezius. And underneath those, we have the rhomboids, major and minor, which would also be underactive. And then we have the most superior upper trapezius, which is overactive. And we always foam roll and stretch. The joke I like to make on social media is if you don't, you die. You need to do that for 20 to 40 seconds. So this is a little test just to see how you are with a big portion of the exam. And where it can get very overwhelming is you're reading 800 pages. What do I note card? You go to Quizlet, you go to another page, Sort of Healthy or Axiom, whoever it is, and they're telling you got to study the whole textbook and blah, blah, blah. But if you don't have a really good grasp for the majority of the test, the meat and potatoes, overactive muscles, movement competency in the OPT model, you're going to have a really hard time on this exam. And that's why as much as 40% of people fail, is because they try to soak it all in. And our goal is to get you to pass this as quick as you can. Next, we have the compensation patterns of the lower side, which would be lower cross syndrome, which is more the hips having an anterior tilt. This would be your pronation distortion syndrome, pes planus syndrome, and or knee valgus. They're used interchangeably. We just need to know on the left side here, when your knees adduct in the frontal plane, when your ankles, this would be called eversion, when they come in like that, that's going to be your hamstring muscles on the lateral side being overactive, which would be your bicep femoris. And then also your gastroc and soleus. When I say gastroc, the whole term is gastrocnemius. When we look at the knees moving inward, that's going to be typical knee valgus, which is going to be your adductor magnus being overactive and your glutes being underactive. What do we do to overactive? Foam roll and stretch. What do we do to underactive? We strengthen with a 4-2-1-1 tempo. Now, where it can get confusing is they could literally ask 3 very similar questions. One could ask, your client is performing the overhead squat. Their knees buckle in. Which of the following muscles is overactive? Your gluteus maximus, your gluteus minimus, your VMO, or your adductor magnus? The correct answer would be your adductor magnus. 2 or 3 questions later, typically the next one would be about heart. Which of the following are the superior chambers? Which of the following are the inferior chambers? Something along those lines. That'd be your atria, the superior ones, or your ventricles, the posterior one. Then you get to the next question. It says your client's performing the overhead squat and their knees buckle in. Which of the following muscles are underactive or lengthened or weak? Those are all used interchangeably as overactive, shortened, and strong, or tonic are used interchangeably. And then they're going to ask you about the OPT model. They're going to ask you about relative flexibility. These are questions that we post daily on the Facebook group. But then there's going to be a question about your client has the overhead. They're doing the overhead squat assessment. Their knees buckle in. Which of the following would be the most appropriate exercises? They're going to have a stability ball squat curl press. They're going to have a bench press, a push-up, and a single leg scaption or something. And so you need to recognize that to strengthen the weakened muscles, in that example, you'd want to do a stability ball squat curl press. That cures everything in the NASM world. A more specific one would be lateral band walking. Now, if it's looking at the mid-back, we're looking for scaption and or a ball combo 1 or 2. So if you don't know the NASM vocabulary, it can be very challenging. Moving on to the third one, and I'm going to go over all these variables and we'll have more descriptions here shortly. But what are the acute variables for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? The OPT model, there's 3 parts: stabilization, strength, and power. You need to know all the reps, rest, intensity, tempo, sets. And then take it a step further. Can you name 5 exercises per phase? Stability ball squat curl press, always going to be stabilization. A bound is going to be power. A bench press will be strength, whereas a TRX row will be stabilization. But not only can you recognize where they go in the OPT model, can you tell me the agonist, antagonist, and synergist? Stabilizers are super simple. Upper body, it's always the rotator cuff. That's CUFF, the sits muscles, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis. You don't need to know the specific names. You just need to know the rotator cuff. For the lower body, it's always the same, being the TVA, what NASM likes to say. That's your transverse abdominis, always going to be underactive, but also always the stabilizer for lower body exercises. To take that a step further, can you name the plane of motion? So I said a TRX row, it's a neutral position that's going to be sagittal. If you were doing a military press, that's going to be frontal. If you were doing a bicycle twist, that's transverse. Can you also tell me the muscles that are associated with that? Is it more type 1, type 2? So what we like to do when we teach this is to give you the meat and potatoes, focus on there. When you go through every single chapter, 7, I just did a podcast on this one, is where most people get hung up. And unfortunately, what we do when we get hung up, we waste time. We get frustrated. We have insecurities, which we call ants, automatic negative thoughts, super normal. But then we put the book aside and we go back to our life. And guess what happens? 6 months goes by. And then you get that fun email from NASM and they say, you have 10 days to take your test, or you got to pay us more money. That's why they're owned by Blackstone Investment Corporation. They have lots of money to market to get in front of you, but then they want more money. And so then you sign back up for it. And I've had people that have literally spent 3+ years going through this. And that's why we focus on speed. Because worst case scenario, you fail. Oh my God, you are not a failure. But now you realize that, holy crap, if I would have passed it, would I have been ready to train someone? What if I had a friend or a client who needed to lose 50 pounds, or they had a rotator cuff issue, or they had ankle Achilles tendinopathy? I just did a podcast with Doc Farnsworth. He's a physical therapist, and we went over the mechanisms for Achilles. Having a therapist on your team is what's going to separate you from the market. So then you feel down on yourself, but you have to realize that this test is not going to make you a great trainer. Getting in the trenches and having a mentor, having that next step is what's really going to level you up. My book, won't go too much in it. I'm not going to throw too much at you, but volume 2, it has an entire chapter. That's something that's different from the first volume. So I really break down a lot of the stuff that we just talked about. If you get it and you leave a 5-star review, we'll send you our study guide. We'll send you our quizzes. We'll give you the map, which helps you pass it in 30 days with links, as well as the on-demand videos. And that's included. Normally that would be a 300+ value. These calls are very, very helpful. Not one, because they're recorded, but 2, you get asked questions, which we'll open it up at the end. So let's take a look at, as I just said, this was someone who recently just said, holy shit, I love that. His words, not mine. His book is awesome. I honestly didn't know what to expect. Chapter 12 alone is going to help my life so much by passing this. So you're able to work within the book, answer questions, and get a good feel for where you are at. This is what we do every month with our seminars. 2 days, we go to Lifetime, we go to Equinox, because our certification is preferred at the best gyms in the world. And we go and we teach our soft tissue certification, which is really going to level you up and give you that confidence. So let's get into the paradigm with disease. And the CDC looking at 5 out of 6 of the leading causes of death were from chronic disease, which are, for the most part, preventable. A lot of people are dying from coronary artery disease, which is preventable for the most part, diabetes, obesity, and so forth. So we should know the definition of obesity, which would be defined as a BMI, body mass index, greater than 30. Now, you could have mixed feelings on the BMI, but at the end of the day, if you were to have 100 Americans in front of you, I could look at someone and say, you know what? This dude over here is pretty jacked. He has more muscle. This doesn't apply to him. Or this girl is really fit. She has a lot of lean muscle on her. This doesn't apply to you. But for the average person, it's pretty damn accurate. And studies show that once you get into that overweight range, which is 25 to 29.9, you are statistically more likely to get these diseases. When you get above 30, which is obesity, you're even more likely. The desirable range is 18.5 to 24.9. So how a question would be posed: which of the following would be a desirable BMI range for a client? And they're going to have 15, they're going to have 18, they're going to have 23, they're going to have 27. So the correct answer would be C on that one. Click it, move on. Obesity. 66% of Americans over the age of 20 are overweight. And we're looking at 80% plus by 2030. That is knocking on the door. That is job security for trainers. It is not a saturated market. This is a great career where you can turn your career into a passion. I've been doing this for 20 years, teaching trainers for over 10. I've owned gyms. We have our own certification. There's nothing I would rather be doing. There's so much opportunity to help people because that's why we get into it. But there's also a ton of financial security if you're able to develop those streams of revenue. We're going to talk about this guy on the right here in a second with low back pain because we were at a seminar in Atlanta and we did a screen for his low back, and you're going to see here in a second how you're able to refer out if you need to, but also implement the appropriate exercises if a client were to have low back discomfort, which is very, very common. 4 out of 5 people, or 80%, have low back pain. When it comes to cholesterol or blood, remember, all arteries go away from the heart. All veins go back to the heart. You may see 3 to 5 questions around heart stuff. If you go to the Reddit world or Facebook group and people give you their feedback tip, they're actually not allowed to tell you what's on the exam. We don't tell you what's on the exam. We don't know what's on the exam. We're just giving you our best guesstimation. But you will see people say, like, oh my God, there's so much on nutrition, or there's so much on heart, because of how the brain works. If you study a lot of the whole entire textbook, and then there's 3 questions on the heart, which you're completely unaware of what the answer is, that's going to stick out in your mind. So afterwards, you're thinking, oh my God, there was so much on the heart. But in actuality, you just weren't prepared for those questions. The main stuff is going to be OPT model. You're going to see stuff on SAQ, maybe 1 or 2 questions, maybe 3 to 5 questions on nutrition. But the stuff around the heart, pretty simple, with LDLs being the bad cholesterol, the HDLs being the good cholesterol. They're not going to ask you numbers. What is considered a normal range, 45 to 55? They're not going to ask you that. They're just going to say, which of the following is considered the vacuum cleaner when it comes to cholesterol? And that would be your HDLs, high density lipoproteins. And this is getting into healthy cholesterol, diabetes mellitus, type 1 and type 2. 1 is genetic, 2 is onset because of sleep, stress, excess adiposity, which just means fat, which is reversible. Type 1 is not reversible. You are required to take an insulin shot because your cells do not produce insulin. Your pancreas is where we produce insulin, the beta cells. And if you have type 1 diabetes, usually less than 10 years of age is when you get it. Type 2 is insulin resistant because I have a Snickers bar and my blood sugar levels increase, my glucose levels increase, but my cells cannot take insulin out, which is an anabolic hormone, and put it into my cells. So it's resistant. So think of like your thermostat, and it says here in Santa Monica, I'm at the gym right now, it's 71 degrees. If the wiring was faulty, even though it says 71, there's something messed up, it's going to pump in a bunch of cool air and it doesn't change. That's what type 2 diabetes essentially is. Your cells do not recognize insulin, so your glucose levels are constantly elevated. So our brain recognizes that, communicates with the pancreas to pump out more insulin. And that's where we have a nasty condition today, which affects a lot of people. As I said, type 1 onset, type 2 is going to be insulin resistant. About 90, 95 of the cases are that. We are not exercising 30 minutes, 5 days a week. I would probably be willing to bet it's Thursday, May 20th or so, that most of us have already done 150 minutes this week. We are psychopaths as trainers. We love exercise. I bet you there's some of us in here that have worked out probably 2 or 3 hours in a day this week. That's not our clients. And so that's why we're doing this, is to help create good eating patterns, but also be disciplined with our workouts and enjoy movement. So here we have low back pain. As I said, you could see when this individual were to go down testing lateral flexion in the frontal plane, there was discomfort. And so from that data, we're able to give him an exercise program that's specific to the individual, which is really important, because what we don't do as trainers, which we shouldn't do, is just prescribe random exercises. Oh, you have knee pain, you should do this knees over toe exercise. No, we should address why we have knee pain. Let's screen the ankle, let's screen the hip, let's look at Is it a deficit issue? Is it a stability issue? We need to go through these. And unfortunately, these are things that are not brought up in the NASM textbook, but those are things that we teach you. ACL stands for anterior cruciate ligament. We have the PCL, which is the posterior. We have the lateral and the medial collateral ligament. Ligaments are avascular, which means they lack blood flow. 80 to 100,000 ACL tears per year. We had some Achilles issues in the NBA recently with Tatum and also Lillard. They blew out their Achilles. Your Achilles is a tendon, which connects muscle to bone. NASM isn't going to ask you about what is the name of the heel bone. It's the calcaneus. They're not going to get into anything much around that. More so just what is a tendon or what is a ligament. A ligament connects bone to bone. You are seeing a lot of injuries and pain when it comes to people today and worldwide. Here I'm doing a soft tissue technique, which trainers can do if you have the right certification. Our soft tissue certification allows for you to get into certain areas that are more prone to discomfort, apply pressure, implement the proper mobility, stability, and exercise program. Here's our lovely OPT model. Anytime you see these words associated with a specific level, proprioceptive enriched environment. If I ever see that on an exam, you automatically choose stabilization. If you ever see stability ball, squat, curl, press, just choose stabilization, move on. That's what they're looking for when it comes to this. The model was designed by Dr. Clark, very impressive physical therapist, but he is a therapist, and therapists suck with programming. But this is what you need to know for the OPT model. You stay there for a month, then you go into whatever phase is appropriate for your client. If they want to put on size, we call that muscular development. If they want to work on strength endurance, all that means is supersets. If they want to get stronger, you go to max strength. You be there for a month, and then you choose on where you want to go next. Maybe you want to go to power. Maybe you want to go down back to stabilization. That is your choice. But you have to be there for a month minimum to work on neuromuscular recruitment and optimization, and then you are able to go to the next one. You just cannot go from 1 to 5. You can go from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, but you cannot go 1 to 5. So let's take a look at these phases and what you need to know. The main focus for stabilization is strengthening and optimizing neuromuscular efficiency. And anytime you see proprioception or the spine stable, such as a prone isolab, which would be a plank, always stabilization. When we're doing a balance exercise, if you are not moving, that is stabilization. If you're doing an ab exercise and the spine is not moving, that is stabilization. After a month there, you go into whatever the client wants to do next. And each block would be considered a mesocycle. So when we look at periodization, that is a month. Mes in Spanish is month. So you're looking at a month block. Long term would be your macro cycle, big picture. Small would be your weekly cycle. Think of a micro machine, those small little cars, microcycle. And then you would move into whichever phase you feel is appropriate, starting with phase 2. All you need to know with phase 2, you don't even need to know the acute variables here. You just need to know it's going to be a stable followed by an unstable. So for example, a bench press into a stability ball push-up, a back squat into a step up and a hold, a pull-up into a TRX row, a military press into a single leg scaption. And if you get this recording, a good exercise is to go back through what I just said and identify the agonist, the synergist, the stabilizer, antagonist, plane of motion. So when we're looking at the military press, for example, concentrically, which means to accelerate, the muscle is shortening, you would be in the frontal plane because of humeral abduction, which is going to be the agonist at the humerus, which is your arm bone, your deltoids. The synergist at the elbow would be your tricep. And the joint, the force couple at the scapula would be your upper trapezius, lower trapezius, and your serratus anterior. They work together to move the scapula upwardly. You should be able to recognize those main agonists and synergists. When we go to phase 3, we like to call this muscular development, which is just hypertrophy. You're going to be doing 6 to 12 reps there, and I'll go over these acute variables here in a second. Phase 4 is strength. So when you see which phase would you go to optimize motor unit recruitment to increase that? A motor unit is a motor neuron and all the associated muscle fibers that it innervates. When you look at the neuron, there's three parts of it: axon, dendrite, cell body. They could ask you a physiology question around that, but you should know what the definition of a motor unit. Again, a motor neuron and all the associated muscle fibers that it innervates. INNERVATES. Innervation, think of that as excitement. Above me right now, we have some lights. When I turn on the light switch, think of that as the motor unit. I'm getting a signal from the light switch, which is your brain. It goes to the light and it turns it on. That is the innervation part. Now, depending on the force that is being produced, it could be high threshold, which would be more type 2 muscle fibers, which are characterized as fast, characterized by having low mitochondria, low capillary density, so they fatigue quickly. Which of the following muscle fibers has great local muscular endurance? That would be your type 1 muscle fibers. We call those slow twitch. When we move into phases 2, 3, and 4, and 5, that's primarily type 2 recruitment. Phase 1, that's the stabilizing type 1 muscle fibers that we'll be engaging. And as I said earlier, phase 5, the big thing we need to know, very similar to phase 2, but now we take a power exercise and then we associate it with a stable exercise. We're doing heavier loads and or explosive. So a back squat into a jump, a pull up into a ball slam, a bench press into a plyo med ball press, a military press followed by throwing a med ball above your head. Recognizing explosive as phase 5, stable into unstable phase 2. That's all you need to know for phases 2 and 5. So when we look at the rep ranges, power is going to be 1 to 10 with a 30 to 45% of intensity. We'll look at that in a second. Max strength, 1 to 5, which is 85 to 100%, which would be in phases 4 and 5. 6 to 12 reps would be phase 3, and 12 to 20 would be phase 1 and 2. Sets, pretty much just think low sets, phase 1, moderate sets, strength, high, 4 to 6 is going to be power. Typically with sets for strength and power, as that goes up, our intensity is going to be affected as well. Intensities, 30 to 45% or 10% of your body weight. So a question could ask you about nutrition. Which of the following has 9 calories per gram? And you need to be able to answer fat for that one. And the next question could say your client is performing 5 reps at 85%. Which phase of the OPT model would this be in? 5 would be associated with phase 4 because that's max strength, 1 to 5 reps. 75 to 85% would be phase 3. 50 to 70% would be phase 1. Tempo, pretty simple. 4-2-1-1 is going to be phase 1. 2-0-2-0, phase 3. XXX, I once had an international student in class. He said, Chris, I went home. I got in trouble because I was trying to understand the tempos and I typed in XXX. Yeah, don't do that. You're going to get some weird stuff popping up on your computer. So it's just making reference to the first one being eccentric. The muscle is lengthening. You want to have control. So when I do a stability ball squat, curl, press, I'm coming down for 4 seconds with control, pausing isometrically, which can just be seen as no movement. This is an isometric contraction. A plank is an isometric contraction. A wall sit is an isometric contraction. Followed by the next 2, which would be concentric. And then you're going to have the next isometric. This one only has 3, but you're going to see 4 on the exam. Power, maximal strength, phase 4 and 5 will be XXX. Hypertrophy, phase 3, 2-0-2-0. And then slow for phase 1. The things that you need to take from these charts, if you have the textbook, if you want to, I don't suggest you getting it, just using, whether it's the podcast or my book, that chapter is going to be more than enough to help you hyper focus on the variables and the vocab words that are needed to pass. Our goal is not to get an A on the NASM CPT. You do not look at influencers' Instagram bios and see, I got an A on the NASM. No, they passed it. That's all we want to do. We want to pass it. Think of it like a basketball game. I want to make the free throw. I don't give a shit if you swish or if it bounces 15 times and goes in, did you make it or did you not make it? So you need to know the resistance part for each one of the phases. SAQ stands for speed, agility, and quickness. The only things they're going to ask you on there, maybe specific drills for seniors, a stand up, walking around a chair and coming back. They call that stand up to figure 8. Knowing that the definition of agility is to be able to start and stop as quickly as possible, whereas speed is just linear velocity. Plyometrics for phase 1, know that part, 3 to 5 second hold on the landing. So you jump and you come down and you hold. When it comes to balance, know the exercises that are associated with the phase. Standing on one leg is phase 1. Standing on one leg and tapping while my standing leg is moving through concentric and eccentric, that's phase 2, 3, and 4. When you change your base of support, that's phase 5. When it comes to core, when the spine does not move, that's phase 1. When you do a crunch or a curl, that's phase 2, 3, and 4. When you throw something explosively, a med ball throw, rotation, that's going to be phase 5. Flexibility, static, phase 1. We always foam roll. Remember, if you don't, you die. Phase 2, 3, and 4, if there is active isolate, which is slight 1 to 2 second holds, holding my arm there and coming back. Exactly like that, 1 to 2 seconds. Where dynamic is sport specific, such as a prisoner squat or a lunge with a twist. That's what we need to know when it comes to the names of the exercises for stabilization. For strength, memorize the acute variables. When I say acute variables, I'm just looking at reps, sets, tempo, intensity, rest. Phase 1, 0 to 90 seconds rest. Phase 2 and 3, 0 to 60. Phase 4, 3 to 5, 2 to 5. They're not going to stump you on, is it 4 minutes or is it 3 minutes? It's going to be pretty obvious. Same with power. That's going to be longer rest periods. Know the names for the exercises that are specific. Power, explosive, another superset, and knowing the drills that you would be putting in there. The definition of power is force times velocity. That's a good flashcard to note. They could ask you something along those lines, knowing the difference between VT1, VT2, which is the cardio stuff. Nothing crazy on there. Knowing the vocab words. We have a blog. We have a lot of blogs that are for free. We have 50 vocab words that we define. Get that sucker, print those out, and that's all you need to know. That's why I don't, we're a business. We're trying to grow our certification to become the top one out there and compete with NASM. We got into 2024 top 10 certifications, but you need to take the test with the NASM hat on. So when you take the exam, don't use material from other associations. That's not going to work on this exam. And that's why we have those 50 key words that you need to know for NASM, because you memorize that, you're going to be fine. If you go to Quizlet and you get 1,000 flashcards, well, you're going to be looking at probably 90% that are going to clog your mind, and the ones that you miss, you're going to get anxious over. That's why I don't suggest taking the NASM quizzes, because they have hundreds of them. And then if you get a 60, you're like, oh shit, I'm not going to be able to pass this. I'm going to study more. But more than likely, that test might only have 1 or 2, or that topic may only have 1 or 2 questions on the exam. And then last but not least, these are what our offerings are, and I'll open it up for questions. We will be in Miami, June 27th, 28th, 13th, and 14th in Denver. That's our partnership with Lifetime. If you get our certification, you're guaranteed an interview. Equinox and Lifetime, only certification out there that can say that. We have our guarantee to pass in 30 days, which includes our certification, our SUF CPT, which is recognized globally. And we're bumping that price up to $799 in June. So the goal, pass this as quickly as possible, but I will open it up for any questions that you have.